We are turning now to Peter Bell, a dear close friend as well as an assistant with me on the catalog of Italian bronze sculpture. When I say in the Metropolitan Museum, that is to say, when I say forthcoming, don't hold your breath. But it will happen. Peter is finishing up his degree at the Institute of Fine Arts. And I'm going to plug the Met Journal as an example of his stellar scholarship, in which he brings together all the documentation for the incredible bronze mermaid that's at the end of the Cinquecento gallery, and it'll be there for your viewing pleasure also. Peter, where are you?
Let me add my voice to the chorus of thanks to Katya and to Jim for everything. So, small-scale sculpture achieved new prominence in Italy in the second half of the 15th century. The recovery and revaluation of artifacts and textual accounts of ancient sculpture, along with a new culture of collecting, led by such wealthy and powerful figures as Pope Paul II and Lorenzo de' Medici, created and sustained demand for intimate objects for display and personal reflection. This mania might have begun with ancient things of exceptional virtuosity or material worth, such as cameos, hard stonework, coins, but it soon expanded, encompassing ancient as well as contemporary sculpture. At the same time, sculptors and patrons created new types of art, such as commemorative medals, and sought to revive and redeploy artistic techniques, such as micromosaic and lost wax casting. With these efforts came new types of objects new to the age, among the most recognized of which is the independent bronze statuette. Florence was an epicenter of these developments and a hotbed of sculpture making in general, as we've already seen today. It was in this milieu of the 1480s and early 1490s that, as a boy, Michelangelo first saw sculpture and learned to make it, with a new intensity upon his entry into the circle of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Filarette's equestrian on the left, made in the 1440s, and the first known bronze statuette of the Renaissance, was probably in Lorenzo's possession. And Bertoldo, who made more bronze statuettes than anyone we know by that date, we have heard was Michelangelo's educator and cohabitant. We know Lorenzo owned at least one of Bertoldo's statuettes, a lost centaur, and as Jim said earlier, he likely owned many more. It's a safe presumption that Lorenzo also owned Pollaiuolo's Hercules and Antaeus, this compositional marvel and paragon of the new type. It seems inconceivable, therefore, that the young Michelangelo would have not been intrigued and challenged by the notion of the independent statuette, as colleagues in this room have carefully considered and written and spoken about before. Michelangelo was capable of making bronze sculpture and took commissions to do so in his early career. Paul Joannides has rightly defended this aspect of the artist's practice, pointing to the bronze David commissioned in 1502 by the Florentine Republic for a powerful member of the French court, and 5 years later, the monumental seated Pope Julius II made to loom over the recently conquered city of Bologna. Both sculptures are now lost. Michelangelo's large-scale sculptural projects later in his career would also have included bronze features, narrative reliefs, and decorative elements, had they been finished to plan. Also, we know that at least later in his career, Michelangelo made many small-scale models in wax, wood, and clay, which must have served a variety of purposes in the processes of commission, conception, and design. Some such models may have survived, either in the original or as bronze casts made to preserve the design, but regardless of their authorship, whether made by Michelangelo at his behest or by a follower, whether preparatory to another more permanent iteration or made to copy a finished sculpture after the fact, whether cast soon after the modeled original or decades later. Regardless of this, the intention of the modeler was not, I believe, to produce a finished work of art, as it was for Pollaiuolo or Bertoldo. So despite his knowledge of the techniques of bronze making, which no doubt began in his years with Bertoldo, there's no indication to me that Michelangelo made a proper bronzetto, a small bronze in the Florentine manner of these artists. But this is not to say that he was not influenced by what he saw. I would like to consider the impact of early independent statuettes, those conceived and made in and of themselves, that might have had upon the developing Michelangelo. But to begin, what kind of small-scale sculpture might Michelangelo have known in his Florentine youth? A very few representative examples will have to suffice here. Much of the small-scale sculpture in full relief of the 15th century existed in ensemble with architectural elements. Tomb sculptures, such as Desiderio da Settignano's tomb for Carlo Marsupini of the 1450s in Santa Croce on the left, included these shield-bearing putti sculpted fully in the round. And on the right is Desiderio's Sacrament Tabernacle for San Lorenzo the following decade, also including small sculpture. Michelangelo might have recalled such compositions when his fortuitous stop in Bologna in 1494 led to a commission for marble statuettes to add to the Ark of St. Dominic. Though enjoying next to no control over the disposition and size of these figures, the sculpture program being firmly set long before his arrival, the 19-year-old nonetheless achieved rare effects of modeling in the bodies and draperies. Florentines would also have been aware of the important developments in Siena, including the baptismal font of the 1410s and 20s on the left, studded with small bronze figures by Donatello and other sculptors. Vecchietta's more recent response to this sculptural complex, his bronze ciborium for the high altars of the nearby Santa Maria della Scala, finished in 1472, replaces most of the architectonic elements with figural support. There are alternating levels of putti and angels going up the composition. Singular lavabo or font figures, such as the hefty bronze John the Baptist now in the Bargello, were fixed at the center of the large vessels they adorned. Similar conceptions of small-scale sculpture existed in civic and secular settings as well, as this door surround in the Palazzo Pubblico by Benedetto da Maiano from the late 1440s. Often they were also disposed as fountain figures, and we can look to Verrocchio's Putta with a Dolphin, made for a Medici villa outside Florence, or an earlier gilt sprite in the galleries here at the Met, also made for a Medici fountain. The plasticity of certain figures on Ghiberti's second set of bronze doors for the baptistry are also suggestive of statuettes in the round, while remaining firmly embedded in their narrative scenes and foliate frames. There were also ancient statuettes coming to light with increasing frequency and entering collections, such as this marble Cupid, to which we will return. The 15th century statuette of Marsyas at Right is based on ancient visual sources, and a version of it is documented in Lorenzo's possession as well. The figure was much admired in Florence, copied in drawing and painting in bronze in the 15th century. But the earliest known Renaissance small bronze was not a copy of an ancient statuette, but a much reduced interpretation of the monumental bronze equestrian Marcus Aurelius in Rome. Filarette's statuette, now in Dresden, was owned by the Medici family from 1465 until at least the early 1490s. Modern large-scale sculpture could also be a source, as it was for Bartolomeo Bolano's statuette, which reflects Donatello's Bronze David. There were also, of course, the novel modern statuettes made in Florence from the 1470s to 90s that we've heard much about today. Claudia Kritzigersch recently invited her audience at a lecture down the street to consider the sheer novelty and ingenuity posed by the few bronze statuettes made before 1500. To do so, we have to set aside our knowledge of the almost industrial output of bronzes that began in the 16th century, of potty Severoid inkwells through refined John Bolognesque nudes, and indeed to forget much of the classification and celebration of this type of sculpture that art history and museology has since accomplished. To put aside, in other words, the galleries and vitrines brimming with bronzes. This is no small task. But for this, the textual record can provide a window to look at small-scale sculpture instead through the eyes of the Renaissance. Not surprisingly, in the late 15th century, writers discussed statuettes in different terms from our own. Pliny, much admired in the Renaissance and often cited as a literary source partly responsible for the reinvention of the bronze statuette, uses the general term signa, to describe statuettes when discussing the high value the ancients placed on those objects made of Corinthian bronze. In his natural history. Signa can also refer to medallions, signet rings, or brooches, or indeed any image as a work of art in given certain usage. Recovered and circulated in the 15th century with his Sylvae, Statius's poem in praise of a famous small bronze begins with the title Hercules Epitrapezios, or Hercules of the Table, a pleasingly indirect way to suggest the small scale of the sculpture by reference to its ideal viewing position. Renaissance writers knew and revered these texts. 15th century treatises and legal descriptions, however, can seem every bit as general or indirect, but often for the historian more frustratingly so. But their choices can tell us a lot. In his book on the art of sculpture, Pomponio Garrico, writing around 1500, uses the same term as Pliny, signa, to designate small-scale sculpture. He even devotes a section to justifying typological names for sculpture based upon their size. Here he says that sometime in post-Homeric history, statues less than life size came to be called signa, and those of about a half meter or less were called sigilla, the diminutive. Yet, later in his book, when Garrico lists the best modern sculptors and their accomplishments, some of whom we know produce small bronze of quality, such as Riccio and Bolano, and others in quantity, like Severo da Ravenna, here he does not mention statuettes. Similarly, in the 1492 Medici inventory, there's no typological term for statuettes. We discover them instead thanks to measurements that are sometimes recorded, and by looking for a certain combination of medium and subject and monetary value. The primary descriptor is always the subject, a Hercules strangling Antaeus, or a nude, or sometimes just a figure. And the secondary descriptor is generally the material, bronze. It remains that for many of these entries, we couldn't be sure the object being referred to as a statuette, but for contextual clues, such as monetary worth, or by matching a known object with an inventory description. Gianfrancesco Gonzaga's posthumous inventory of 1496, which probably lists dozens of statuettes, including some of Antico's, does use the terms figurine and figurette, but only sporadically. Size descriptors, like very small, are sometimes used, but even some of the inventory entries identified with known statuettes by Antico, such as a version of this Hercules, now in the Frick collection, lack the designation of size or type. They are described solely by subject and medium. This is in contradistinction to the way many more established types of objects are described, in which case the class of object is always mentioned first, followed by distinguishing characteristics, as, for example, a salt cellar made in the shape of a conch, or a small vase worked with leaves, mounted with silver. While it is true that the inventories were not made in expectation of the uses to which we put them, if there was a descriptive type word at hand, it was generally used, and used to begin the entry, as scritoio, writing desk, or calamaio, inkwell. So the textual record suggests indeterminacy in the designation of this new type of sculpture, both in the theoretical sense of their creation and in the physical facts of their existence. This might, in fact, suggest the broader ramifications of the independent bronze statuette. Though the objects themselves existed in the 15th century, our secure terms of small bronze and independent statuette did not. What small bronzes like Pollaiuolo's or Bertoldo's did was to expand the possibilities of sculpture. Anchored not to altar, building, or piazza, these figures and groups exist wholly for themselves, solely for the consideration and delectation of their owner or viewer. In the case of some of the finest examples, as with Bellano's David or many of Antico's small-scale evocations of antiquity, such as this one here at the Met, this autonomy extended to haptic apprehension. The sculptures responded to touch and manipulation. They are weighted to be turned and picked up, and even when left on a surface, encourage the movement of shifting perspective. The independent statuette encourages sculpture itself to move without the bounds of program or the fixity of function. The reinvention of the independent statuette is a harbinger of an artistic culture in flux. It is the sense of conceptual finish, integrity, and self-sufficiency expressed in our use of the terms small bronze and independent statuette that I want to hold on to in this discussion. For I think it was an idea that, if not named, was surely apprehended by sculptors and art lovers in the last decade of the 15th century. The bronze statuette was one of the best places to consider sculpture, sui generis, for its own sake, independent. We can well understand how such considerations might have stimulated Michelangelo, dedicated as he was at this point in his life to constructing his own identity and renown as that of a sculptor. Bronze was a valuable and significant material in the Renaissance, suggestive of antiquity and utility and power, but clearly it was not the only game in town for a sculptor poised to redefine the nature of his art. So back to our young artist. If the Battle of the Centaurs is his, or the brawl, is his response to sarcophagus decoration and Bertol's bronze relief, and the Madonna of the Stairs is a meditation on Donatello's distinctive schiacciato style, and the storied Mask of the Faun and Sleeping Cupid were made in direct communication with antique models, then the question remains, where is Michelangelo's essay on the nascent independent statuette? Of course, it might not exist, and it might never have existed, but I will conclude with a suggestion. We're familiar at this point in the day with the young archer now on view here. So thanks to Gino Corti and Lauri Fusco, we know that this Hellenistic Cupid, now shown in two views here, now in the Uffizi, matches the description of an ancient marble that Lorenzo de' Medici acquired in 1489 through his agent in Rome. It was missing the arms at that point, but still had the head intact. That's how we can identify it. And it could well have been in the garden at San Marco with Michelangelo. Apart from the basic iconography of a quiver of arrows, the advanced left foot, and its upward gaze, it offers little in the way of comparison, perhaps, with the young archer. But if we draw our attention to the base, the circular base with a coved or wasted profile is relatively commonplace in certain types of ancient sculpture, in particular Hellenistic and Roman statuettes. It also began to find greater currency among sculptors in the 15th century. Like any base, it partakes of both intra and extra sculptural space, sharing affective characteristics with the sculpture and with that which surrounds it. The geometry of the circular form circumscribes the sculpture above, and the undercut profile lifts it away visually from the surface beneath, simultaneously containing the sculpture and setting it at a remove from everything else. The circular form also encourages movement around the sculpture in a way that I discussed the Antico satyr statuette earlier. That this type of base in particular harkens to antiquity, and given the benefits of the circular form, it's understandable that some early bronzisti used it. Adriano Fiorentino, Bartolomeo Bellano, and most exquisitely, perhaps, Antico. But if Michelangelo saw the marble Cupid, or any statuettes like these, it might have been the demarcation of space and the implied and impelled movement around the figure that most piqued his interest. The mid-18th century drawings by Jean-Robert Angot that depict the Apollo or Cupid, when it was still mostly intact in the Villa Borghese, probably, though spare and atmospheric, employ an economy of lines to sketch out the forms. Yet still, there seems to be the suggestion of a circular base in both drawings. I'll put in my little sketches there and then take them away. If the archer's left foot seems poised to slip off the front, as the angle suggests, and as it seems particularly so in the Louvre drawing on the right, we might think ahead to a similar gesture in the marble David. In the same way, Michelangelo revisits the abstracted rocky base of the Bacchus about 5 years later in the colossal David. In this same way, the base of the young archer might have prefigured those for the Bruges Madonna and the Piccolomini saints in the early years of the 1500s. If the young archer had a circular base, it would have only encouraged the subtle spiral of the body that plays out from the crossed legs. Even in the sculpture's state today, this effect pulls the viewer around the sculpture. But the abstract and geometrically perfect base also sets a sculpture apart, encouraging not civic or religious meaning, but rather personal significance. Its suggestion of antiquity also would accord with the archer's subject and style, and would have made it that much more at home in a collection like Jacopo Galli's, where it would be free to construct its own meanings through the eyes of its viewers. In this sense, the young archer prefigures John Bologna's famous subjectless statues of the following century. And in fact, already by the mid-16th century, Michelangelo's boy had already constructed dual identities as Aldovrandi's Apollo and Condivi's Cupid. Thank you.